Hi there, welcome to Living a Primal Lifestyle. I'm nicodehaan, and this is where we explore a return to a more balanced and natural wild world.
To recover our natural health and regain our rights and freedoms. Good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are. This is Ellen Dahan.
All right, and it is about 50 degrees in Durango, about 8 miles west of Durango is where we are.
Up the mountain.
Up the mountain a little bit, and it's a beautiful day. 50 degrees, going down about 26 tonight. It's been kind of unusually warm here.
Yeah, well, it's been warm everywhere pretty much.
Yeah,
If you
except
look
in
at
the
the
east
weather.
right now.
Yeah, well, then today things are shifting.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. So, this program is really about we're checking out the news. It's about health. It's about longevity. It's about trying to find our way to a healthy situation in this modern world, because we really do believe our ancestors had a clue about being healthy. And the clue was they were just living outside most of the time. They were living in the wild. They were getting the food from the wild. And these days, things have changed. Most of our food has been gotten through farms and through livestock.
Agribusiness.
Big businesses. And the farther I think you go down that chain, the worse it gets.
Yeah, one thing that our ancestors had going for them was they didn't actually have to think about it. Their life was what it was. You had survival. That was your primary goal. And the human race evolved to hunt, to gather, to do what they needed to do in order to survive. And they learned the trial and error. If they ate something that didn't agree with them, they didn't eat it again.
Yeah, or they changed it somehow where they could eat it, especially when things got tough.
Yeah.
The
But
animals
that
leave,
was-
or the season changes, or you get a cold spell.
Food, or you have a famine, you have a
Right.
drought.
Yeah.
And in that case, there was adaptation and continued learning and trial and error and figuring things out. And
Yeah. So that's what we're trying to figure out. We're in our 70s. I'm 77, Ellen's 75, and we feel pretty good. We glad
feel
to be,
great. Never mind, pretty good.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah,
And
we have to work on your language.
Yeah, we'll work on our language, that's for sure. So what we do is we take the news on health and things that pertain to that, and kind of try to deconstruct a little bit.
And try and find interesting stuff that you guys will be ready to listen to and find appealing. So that's where we are.
The first article I have here, and these are in the show notes on YouTube, and last time I put it on Facebook too, and LinkedIn, so a little easier access. But we do ask you to subscribe on YouTube to Living a Primal Lifestyle, and also
doesn't cost anything to
right.
subscribe.
Those and like it or dislike it,
who are new to the whole concept of YouTube.
Yeah. And if you have any questions or comments, you can leave them in the show notes underneath in YouTube, or at nicodehaan@me.com. And that link is in the show notes too.
Okay.
All right. So the first article that we're talking about is scientists reveal biological robots can now generate their own offspring.
Now that was a fairly alarming title.
It was to me. It's kind of interesting.
Got our attention.
Yeah, they got clumps of matter in a petri dish, and they swim around, and now they're kind of reproducing.
Well, they started out with they have artificially engineered biorobots, and they call them, what are they calling them?
Little peach blobs.
Yeah, peach blobs, but
they're artificial engineer biorobots caught on camera reproducing for the first time.
Xenobots.
Biobots.
No, I know, but they're calling them xenobots.
Oh, xenobots, yes.
Yes, which are stem cells, and they're stem cells from an African frog embryo, and they do behave in ways that we think of as lifelike in the sense that they reproduce.
Right.
But they're not alive.
Yeah.
So then you have to start thinking, well, wait a minute, what does alive mean?
And I think they're kind of addressing that a little bit in this article too. At first, the bots had a simple purpose: to move forward. Since then, the bots have developed their own motor skills, gained new capacities or capabilities, including memory. I wonder how they measure memory. And the ability to interact with their surrounding environment. And now they can multiply.
Yeah.
What could go wrong?
Yeah.
Is what I'm thinking, and especially frogs, since frogs were
Yeah. Well, if you saw Jurassic Park,
exactly.
the frog DNA plugged into the blanks in the dino DNA,
Yeah, and in that film, of course, it was the frogs that can actually change their gender
if they need to.
if they need to, and here they're using frogs. So it's worth.
Oh, well,
So it says why it matters. These bots look alive, so it's worth thinking about how we define life. According to NASA, life is a self-sustaining chemical system capable of Darwinian evolution.
yeah,
Which meaning that they reproduce and they change as go on.
and evolve to meet their environment and survival needs.
So the question is, how do they stop them from evolving, or do they want them to be evolved?
Well, they don't. And I think what's happening right now is that they're watching them,
Right.
and as they're watching, they're self-replicating. They're not reproducing. Reproducing is creating something from two inputs.
Yeah, but if you think about how a cell, it just divides.
No, it's called reproducing.
Yeah, but it just divides.
It
It's
divides,
not the same
yeah.
thing as human beings or animals are doing.
Right.
And it's not the same thing that plants are doing either.
Right.
Just an extension, creating a seed, and from that seed, new life comes about.
Yeah, and again, this is they're not alive in the sense that they don't have. They don't eat, they don't sleep, they don't think that. Well, we don't know what they do, actually.
That's exactly the right thing. You don't know what they do. So what's next is the algorithm aspect matters when it comes to future applications.
Well, before you get to that, just a second,
Sure.
just a little bit here. They said originally they put those cells in a saline solution.
Right.
They were stem cells from the African frog embryos, and they put them in a saline solution, and that prompted the cells to kind of mass together into spheres of about 3,000 cells each. Then after 3 days, the spheres developed cilia, which are those little hair-like appendages that allowed them to interact with the surrounding environment. They placed the spheroids in a petri dish with 60,000 other stem cells, and the spheroids sort of herded the other stem cells together into smaller structures of about 50 stem cells each. And then the mini spheres moved around and encountered other stem cells and started the process all over again, building new xenobots as they went. And then in this experiment, there were only enough stem cells to generate 2 new sets of spheres. But still, that meant that the original spheres were in existence long enough to see their grandchildren, the third generation, basically. Right. So then the researchers decided to pair them with a machine learning algorithm that helped guide certain features like sphere shape and sphere size and shape, as well as the terrain they encountered along the way.
So it doesn't really say how they.
Well, they're not going to. So I'm sure it's patented.
Well, that might be too. Yeah. But this algorithm, which I assume is some kind of computer program, maybe that they put in there.
And if these are kind of manufactured cells, then they could presume. And since we're all electric beings anyway, presumably they could program energy to go into them to.
Yeah. Of course, why they did this is for natural repair. In other words, if we need some kind of repair to an organ or to a muscle or something like that, this is indicated to help repair those things or replace those things.
Yeah, well, science fiction movies and stories have been talking about nanobots for decades. Yeah. And what they're trying to do here is create a carrying system that can, if a stem cell bot, as they're calling it, can get through hard to penetrate systems like the blood-brain barrier, then it can deliver drugs to a destination where it needs to go. So you have to wonder who's actually funding this research.
Yeah, all living systems perpetuate themselves by way of growth in or on the body, followed by splitting, budding, or birth. We find that synthetic multicellular assemblies can also replicate by moving and compressing disassociated
Mm-hmm.
cells in their environment into functional self copies.
So it's previously unseen in any organism, and it arises spontaneously over days rather than evolving over millennia. So it's very interesting.
Well, they say also that they show artificial intelligence methods can design assemblies that postpone loss of
Replicative.
ability and perform useful work as a side effect of replication. This suggests other unique and useful phenotypes that can rapidly reach from wild type organisms within selection without selection or genetic engineering.
So
It sounds like a genetic engineering to me in a way.
Yeah, well, genetic engineering, of course, is actually is manipulating the genes and changing the bioorganism.
Right.
This is
just on a cellular level, so
right.
They're not doing that, but what's the next step? Anyway, I found it very interesting, and it's always the scary part. What if this gets out in the wild and starts reproducing itself that way?
Well, the question is,
attaches to something that we don't want it to attach to,
and what will happen?
Right.
Yeah. What does it make a change in the organism? Does it not? Is it just coexist? What exactly?
A lot of unanswered questions.
And that's always the way when there's, and of course, all the stories talk about the hubris of tinkering with nature but these things go on, and so it'll be interesting to follow this kind of investigation.
And we will be, that's for sure.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so the next article we have is why some people find it harder to be happy. And this is by theconversation.com. And it says here that the self-help industry is booming, fueled by research on positive psychology, the scientific study of what makes people flourish. At the same time, the rates of anxiety, depression, and self-harm continue to soar worldwide.
Yeah, we talked about this a lot a couple of shows ago in terms of
positive thinking
and positive speaking,
right.
And how you talk to yourself and how you talk to others, and also kind of how you look at life and so on. And
that's the reason I flagged this, because it does talk about that, about 40% of your ability, or, it says here that 50% of people's happiness is determined by genes.
Which is an interesting idea. And then it goes on. 10% depends on the circumstances. 40% on intentional activity.
And remember that a couple of weeks ago when we talked about positive thinking, I was talking about my dad's influence on me and how he was the positive force in our family. And I always thought I got that from him, whether I got it from the genes or whether I got it because being around him.
Yeah, and that's the interesting part. There was they talked when they the review in General Psychology in 2005, when they created this 50% by genes, 10% on circumstance, 40% on intentional activity. They call that the happiness pie.
Right.
And
well, remember too that we were talking about your upbringing was more on the negative side, because your mother was very negative, and negative not only to herself but towards you and
towards everybody.
Yeah, towards everybody, but somehow you rose above that.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the things they talk about in this article.
Yes.
And back in 2005, when they were saying, okay, it's in your genes, and you don't have a lot of control over it, and so, but maybe you do, because 40% of it is based on intentional activities, so it's decisions you make and choices you make and so on. And then, of course, the message was, if you're unhappy, it's your own fault. Which
in a sense, yeah. But we know that through history, we have developed techniques like prayer, like
meditation.
like positive self-talk, or like things that you say to yourself. What do you call that? Affirmations. And those things appear to help. And
they do help.
Yeah, they do help. And we've certainly used them. I've used them throughout most of my life. And like I said, most of it come from my dad. So that is there. And whether it comes in your genes, here they seem to indicate that maybe half of it is.
Well, but that was back in 2005. And we're coming into 2022. So 2005 was quite a number of years ago.
16, 17 years.
Yeah. And so now they're kind of This article is pointing out that nature and nurture just simply are not independent of each
Right.
other. It's not like, okay, this part came from nature, from my genes, and this part came from nurture. It just doesn't work that way. Everything blends together, and then you have to process it, deal with it, and make your choices.
Yeah, so they're saying 50% comes from your genes, 10% comes from your environment, and then the other 40% comes from how you talk to yourself, basically.
Yeah, and I think that is now skewed more towards maybe equal or maybe even more
Right.
towards the choices you make and the way you recognize what's going on and the changes that you institute in yourself and in your environment. And,
Well, I think too that your environment, and that speaks up to your upbringing. It's not just the environment, like the house that you built, but all the influences that influenced you, where you picked on, where you abused as a child. Those kind of things have a big impact on how you see yourself, and how you see yourself is how you talk to yourself. Yeah. That's the way I see it.
Well, and also it's a matter, even if you had you may have been highly protected as a child. And sheltered as a child, and that will have
perhaps,
yes, and then that will have an impact on your ability to deal with the real world and how things are out there. And they said that in this article, molecular genetics, which is the study of the structure and function of genes at the molecular level, shows that they constantly influence one another. Genes influence the behavior that helps people choose their environment. So, for example, extroversion as a personality trait, being outgoing, passed from parents to children, helps children build their friendship groups. Right. And then, but also, environment changes gene expression. There's an impact on if a mother is pregnant and she's exposed, doesn't have enough to eat, there's famine or there's drought or there's something going on in there, that the genes actually change and babies are born smaller than usual. Right. And then in some cases, there are some negative effects so that they end up with something like cardiovascular disease or something.
Right, because it's not growing to its potential, perhaps,
right.
Yeah, because of the nutrition.
It says they're interdependent, nature and nurture. They affect each other constantly. And again, we talked about, well, I don't know if we actually talked about this on the air, but you're born into a family, you have siblings. Everybody in your family experiences a different family from each other.
Sure.
What the parents that I experience, that I have a memory of, or that I internalized, or whatever, are not the same as my brother by any means, and I'm sure we're not the same for my sister. Right. And it's a fascinating thing. You can be born in the same house, given the same nurturing, sure, and the same parents. But then again, the question becomes, all right, if you're a first child, then the second child has advantages based upon what the parents learned from the first child. And there's so many variables.
From the first child themselves, too.
Right. The first child has an influence. And then you also have, maybe you're in better shape financially. Maybe you're more secure in your job.
And maybe you're used to being around more people. You've got somebody to count on that's your own age or near your own age. All those things, I think, influence you.
And the youngest child in the family, just kind of from a research perspective, it tends to be more adventurous, more secure, more confident. In the sense, and in many cases, because they're born
sometimes
into
the wild child, in a sense.
Right.
I was the younger child, so yeah.
And the boys are different than girls in some cases, and although maybe these days it's not, there's much more
equal.
Well, there's more encouragement.
Well, now we have more genders all of a sudden too. So
aside from all of that. I think the encouragement is a daughter, when growing up in the 50s, was thinking if she were going to work at all, I mean, her first goal was to get married and run a household and have babies. But then, and that was the 40s and the 50s, and even into the early 60s.
Yeah,
and then, but if she did work, then she was going to be a secretary or a nurse.
Right.
Or a teacher.
Yeah. not a doctor or a lawyer.
Right. Or even anything, and not a computer programmer, not an engineer,
Right,
not a
yeah.
construction
And that all
person.
changed during that
Well,
decade, I think.
it is.
And into the 70s. It's
Well,
really,
the women's movement was an attempt to open those doors, and but it's been a very, very
Well,
gradual
yes.
thing. And today, it's safe to say that men, they can do what they want to do. Doesn't matter whatever they want to pursue as a work, or
Yeah.
it's available at this point. And it does say here that some people struggle a little harder to enhance their well-being than others, and that struggle may mean they'll be unhappy for longer periods. And some people, in extreme cases, never experience high levels of happiness. Of course, happiness is defined by each person.
Sure.
And you can only create your own happiness. No one else can give you happiness. But it does say that if you have more genetic plasticity, meaning more sensitivity to the environment and an increased capacity for change, you have to have the ability to be flexible and to embrace change. And if you can do that, then you may have a better chance of enhancing your well-being and even thriving, combined with a healthy lifestyle.
That makes sense.
Yeah, it does. And
of course, today they talk about the anxiety that is today because of the shutdowns and
there's so much.
There's so much
contributing to it, but it does. The article ends with the sentence two sentences. Genetics does not determine who we are. And it does it plays a significant role in our well-being, but it does not ultimately determine. It's not a given. You're not stuck with what you were born with. And it says what also matters are the choices we make, where we live, who we live with, how we live our lives, and those things affect, but not only our happiness, but the happiness of generations to come.
Sure.
The impact that
how you bring up your children and all that,
and how you treat people, and the impact you have on mentoring and supporting and nurturing in general. It's I was thinking about it this morning or last night about that I'm very, very content and happy right now, and more so than I think I've ever been in my life, in the sense that I look around the house and I just love it. And I look outside and I really enjoy looking outside. Yeah. And I think about the life that we've carved out for ourselves. The fact that we made a huge change. Yeah. That we picked ourselves up lock, stock, and barrel. Every single thing we owned, and we moved it 25, how many miles across the country?
2,100, 2,200, yeah. Well, one of the things we talked about before we moved, even, that we had been through the process so many times in our youth. I think I moved 18 or 19 times before I was 20, and I think you did too. And just knowing that you can do these things is a big step, because when we told some of our friends, they go, "Oh my God, you're moving now. Why? You're in Florida. Everything's great." You know?
Oh, people are just stunned that we moved out of Florida. Why in the world would you move out of Florida? And I can tell you 400 reasons why we moved out of Florida. Yeah, and it doesn't matter. We didn't move out of Florida. We moved to Colorado.
That's true. Yeah.
And we moved to a different way of living, and driving in the mountains, and seeing a different environment for ourselves, and creating a different life. And
we just wanted to be around less people.
Yes.
We and just because we don't have as many friends here, it's a little difficult in the beginning. But we are our own friends. We hang around together all the time, and we like being together. Right. We love each other, and that's enough. We will meet people, and certainly through the dojo, I've met some really great people there. Right. And you'll.
And that's the point. I was just talking to a friend of mine back in Florida yesterday, and I said, I realize that I am not in the slightest bit feeling isolated or lonely, even though we don't know a whole lot of people. Yeah. Because, first of all, I have family members that I talk to on the phone, so I'll call them up and say hi, and we'll chat for a bit. And then I also have clients that I talk to on pretty much every day. Somebody's and it might be an email communication, it might be a phone communication, it might be a Zoom call, whatever it is, I'm in contact with people. I'm not sitting by myself and wondering what to do with my time. And people say, what do you do with yourself all day? I say, well, I work.
We are busy, that's for sure.
Yeah, and that's the point, that we're not isolating ourselves, even though we don't know a lot of people. Yep. And in fact, kind of a fun thing in terms of how the universe provides for you when you put something out that you need.
Yep.
We needed to find a local CPA who can help us with the transition to the Colorado. Half the year we were in Florida, half the year we were in Colorado. And so last Saturday we went to lunch at our usual microbrewery that we like. And who sat next to us but a CPA.
Yeah, so it's amazing how that always works.
Yeah.
You're thinking about something, and pretty soon it kind of appears there.
And that's part of the positive thinking. It's opening yourself up to possibilities. Mm-hmm. I have a second children's book that I've been thinking about publishing literally for probably 5 years.
Yeah.
And the artist who illustrated my first children's book, reached out of the blue and said, do you have a book that you want me to illustrate it? I said, I sure do.
Yeah, and
now we're working on that. So.
And that's actually how the first book got processed at the same time. I mean,
that was a crazy story.
Yeah.
I mean, it really. I was standing in our third bedroom at the old house, and I looked down at a scrapbook that I had with my first book, and it had some illustrations in it, but the illustrations had been done by my first husband, and he was no longer long gone from the picture, and I had no way of reaching him and no way to find him to see about using the pictures. And I just thought, well, I need to find an illustrator. And 2 days later, I got a call from my friend, the artist, to whom I had not spoken in probably 40 years.
Yeah.
And he said, I was wondering, I had drawn, when I first wrote the book, it's a long poem, and I had written it quite a number of years ago when he and I were dating. And he had actually, the way he tells the story is, he had his wisdom teeth removed, and while he was under the influence of some extremely good painkillers, he started doodling the drawings for the poem.
Yeah.
And he still had them. So he decided to contact me and say, do you want to finish the book? And
yeah, that was great.
There I was. So
well, that's how things happen.
It's a wonderful thing. And it's especially important that you open yourself up and be available to possibilities and think about what you want. The other thing is, just one other thing.
Sure.
You have to have goals. You have to think of things that you want to do, or you want to achieve, or that you want to happen. Because if you have no goals, then the universe decides what happens to you.
Yeah, and then that's a crapshoot.
And boy, you're not going to like it, I promise.
Yeah, so we've talked about that often. You got to focus on something that you want to do and go towards that, and then the world kind of opens up for that. And I truly believe that, and it's really happened to me through all my life.
Mm-hmm. So. And if you don't have any goals, where are you going?
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so next article is called "Heart Disease Risks from Saturated Fats May Depend on What Foods They Come From." This is new research from the author here is Marinka Sire, I believe.
This was from the University of Cambridge APIC-CVD study, which looked at cardiovascular health of middle-aged people in 10 European countries.
And they're specifically looking at the saturated fat, and this is the reason this perked my interest, because the type of diet that we're on, the foods that we eat a lot of animal food, mostly, and we do eat a lot of red meat, and we do use butter and things like that.
Oh, we also eat pork, and we eat
chicken
and fish and
lamb and everything.
Exactly.
So without reciting the whole thing, they're talking about heart disease and relating to saturated fats, and the studies that they come up with is if you're eating red meat and butter, you're more likely to develop heart disease. The opposite is true from the saturated fats that people eat from cheese, yogurt, and fish, which are actually a lower risk of heart disease.
Very interesting to me was the paragraph that said, now, of course, we did take into consideration various factors such as the person's age, their sex, their physical activity levels. Do they smoke or drink alcohol? Were they overweight or obese? And I think that and it says this minimizes the chances that our findings about fat consumption and heart disease might actually be explained by other factors. But
yeah, and conducting a randomized controlled trial where participants are randomly assessed, they're assigned a certain diet, and whether they stick to that or not, who knows?
Relying on self-reporting.
Yeah, and so it's an interesting thing. I wanted to put that in the show notes.
Well, I think the key here is, while you're looking at all these influences, they didn't look at what's the source of the meat.
Exactly. And that's, one of the things we talk about on this show is that we want to make sure that the animals we eat or the vegetables that we eat come from great sources. In other words, are the animals eating their natural food? Because we know once we start feeding the animals differently, it skews the whole thing. Now, the next article...
Wait, before you go to that,
yes.
Can we go to what's the difference between grass and
No,
grain?
I want to do that third, because I wanted to go to this palmitic
acid?
Yeah, which comes from, majority of the time you hear this phrase, it comes from palm oil, which has the greatest concentration of this type of saturated fat. And, of course, this article is quite technical, so I don't want to go into it too much, but the gist of the whole thing, and this will be, of course, in the show notes, is that this type of oil is about 30% of the fat that's in the human body.
Well, they say that it's... Do they say that it's good for you or not good for you in the article?
Well, what they say is that it depends on what you're consuming. Well, the things I wanted to mention, that red meat and other types of meat have a lot of this in it, as far as it is about 30% of the saturated fat. It's about the same percentage as breast milk has in it.
Yeah, and that was the interesting thing for me when we talked about that.
Yeah, so this is something that naturally occurs in the body. It naturally occurs in the natural food that we eat, both in vegetables and both in the animals that we eat. And what happens is that when you consume a high carbohydrate diet, the whole thing kind of goes wacky. The whole system of the saturated fats, the other types of fats, and the types of saturated fats goes wacky in there. That's just my own little term.
Oh, it's unbalanced.
It's unbalanced.
So it's not sympathetic to each other, so they don't.
Yeah, well, they're saying even if you take palm oil, which is about 44% of this type of total fat in there, it's not good for you, and it's been vilified. But what I'm saying is that the types of oils that we're using these days in fried foods or in vegetable oils or things that you put on your salad comes from vegetables, but it's not the type of oil that assimilates well in our body. It's harder to digest for us. So we don't get the benefit of those really good oils that are in those things. The type of vegetable oils that we get are mostly rancid before we even get them, because they sit in these bottles and they're unstable, and so they get rancid, so they're not a good source. So we're always saying that the good saturated fat and the good omega-3s that come from animals that are eating their natural food. So let's go to that next one, which is what's the difference between grass-fed and grain-fed beef. So we know that this whole process really started thousands of years ago when we herded animals and we started feeding them, because no longer can they go roaming freely. Right. And we know that the big herds always roam thousands of miles. The reason is the season changes, so they have to look for different food. And that roaming around First of all, great physical activity for the animals, and they go to choose different foods that are good for them because the old food is either not there, or it's getting old, or it's withering away. So we are forced as human beings, when we corral animals, to feed them. Now, the feed, if you're feeding them hay, which we did for thousands and thousands of years, that's kind of the next step down from the grass. And if you look at things that have been done as far as tests of winter feed versus summer feed, that the nutrition value really goes down with the winter feed, because now you're storing it. Mm-hmm. It's become hay instead of grass. Mm-hmm. It's still nutritious, but human beings are smart, and they found out that, well, if we're going to prepare for the next year, the hay's not going to last that long, but the seeds are going to last that long. Mm-hmm. Now, the seeds, the animals, if they're confined, are naturally going to eat these seeds, and they're going to chew them up.
If that's all there is.
That's all there is. But we know that the seeds themselves have so many, I would say, contaminants, but they're actually things,
natural
protections for those seeds, because they don't want to be eaten. That's the lifeline of the plant. Mm-hmm. So we've developed a system of feeding them grains and grains. And if we're talking about really confined animals, we're feeding them grains all the time. We're not letting them go outside. They don't get the sunlight. They don't get to roam. And now they're eating probably the worst food there is for them.
If they're outside, they're in a feedlot.
Right. And you remember pictures of these doctors or veterinarians going into testing these animals, and they put a hole in their stomach. They have one test animal that they put a hole in the stomach so they can grab the feed in there from the stomach and test it. And if it's too much, we put antibiotics in them. So, this type of thing that's going on is what really skews the omega-3s. Mm-hmm. And in this article here, the difference between the grass and the feed that we feed them artificially, let's say,
grain-fed.
The grain-fed is the omega-3 is the difference. So in other words, the omega-6 or the 9 or the palm oil type of saturated fat really doesn't change, but the omega-3 goes down. And we know there's been tons of research done that the omega-3s are the things that actually equalizes everything, so everything works really well.
It
it balances
integrate all of the different things.
Exactly.
So they say that grass-fed beef has less monounsaturated fat than grain-fed. Grass and grain-fed are pretty similar in terms of omega-6. But grass-fed has up to 5 times as much omega-3, which is the good omega.
Yeah, and they also have that CLA, which
conjugated linoleic acid,
right, which we find in butter. This fatty acid is associated with a lot of health benefits. Mm-hmm. But so between the omega-3s and the CLA, this is what balances out the red meat.
Any negative.
Right. So if you're consuming things from farms that are large or they're confined more, you're not going to get the same nutrition. And we're finding out the same thing happens to fish. If it's the fish farmed, so now you're confining fish, maybe in a large area, but they're still going to need the food.
And they need antibiotics because they develop diseases and
from the
runs
food we're
through
feeding.
the whole population.
What are we feeding fish? We're feeding them
grain.
Well, grains, usually soybeans.
Yeah, and what natural environment does a fish eat soybeans?
Well, there may be some fish that feed on soybeans, but generally the good trout and the salmon do not. They're eating smaller fish. They're having a quite diverse.
Carnivorous.
Yeah, so they don't have the chance if they're being confined. So the same thing happens, and this is what kind of ties those three articles together. So I just want everybody to understand that red meat is not bad for you. We consume it a few times a week, and it's the same thing with the chicken or the pork. If they're not eating their regular food that we know is good for them, that they know is good for them, they're confined, they're forced to eat other things, the meat is not going to be the same. It's the same thing with if your soil is not great and you're out there growing vegetables and things like that, and soil that's depleted, you're not going to have
the same
nutritional value. That's just the way it goes.
Let's go to the Harvard nutritionist, shall we?
Sure. The Harvard nutritionists.
Mhm.
So this is a
Yeah, this is a great article.
Harvard nutritionist and brain expert says she avoids these 5 foods that weaken memory and focus.
Yeah, it's interesting. This is from a CNBC paper from a contributor that just came out. This is hot off the press, November 28th, 2021.
Yeah, no matter how old you are, it's never too late to start eating in the way that gives you the best possible chance of staving off dementia and all these other brain diseases.
As you age.
Yeah.
And help you feel sharp and focused. I mean, we talked, the other day we ate some sourdough bread.
Yeah.
And you said to me, my brain feels foggy today.
Yeah, it was a couple of days later.
One day later.
Yeah. Was it one day later?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I didn't have any of the usual things that normal bread does, which is
kind
of binding.
You.
It didn't bloat me. It didn't bind me up. It didn't have me be irregular. But it did have that little brain fog still. And this comes from James Ranch. And it's sourdough bread.
Yeah,
and it's
organic.
It's organic, so it's really good. But I did notice that difference, and I attributed it to that because it's the only.
We were trying to think of what we ate that was different.
Yeah, and we had a couple of pieces of bread during that, I think 2-day period.
We actually had one piece each that particular meal,
So.
but we don't normally eat bread or grains. But
it was Thanksgiving.
Oh.
Yeah, it was kind of the special thing. We were having that lamb roast.
Leg of lamb,
which we devoured. It was amazing. The whole thing
we
was
ate
gone.
Everything.
It was great. So we had that little piece of bread with butter on it, and I figured the butter might balance it out.
Well, I was thinking of the day that we had the tapenade, the chopped up olives and things in there, and I think that particular bottle that we had bought, I added all the olives, but before that, what was in that bottle? Cashew nuts.
Oh, yeah, that's a possibility.
Chopped up in little tiny itty bitty pieces, but we don't eat cashew nuts.
Right, and they're not really nuts anyway. So.
Yeah, they're seeds, and so I have a suspicion that it was the cashew nuts and not the bread. But
well, I guess we could experiment.
We'll experiment. Yeah.
Anyway, she identifies 5 foods that weaken the memory and your focus. And the number one thing is added sugar. The brain uses energy in the form of glucose, a form of sugar from to fuel cellular activities.
But
a high sugar diet can lead to excess glucose in the brain, which studies have shown to link to
memory impairment and less plasticity of the hippocampus, which is the part of the brain that controls memory.
So this added sugar, of course, is in processed food like baked goods, like bread and
sodas,
and just about everything else. Now, they have really switched because it's much less expensive to add
high fructose
corn syrup in there instead of sugar, which actually fools the body into thinking that you're not consuming as much sugar.
Well, it floods the brain with too much glucose.
It does, yeah.
And it doesn't break down. That was what kind of scared me when we were studying this a couple of years ago, and discovered that it just sort of lives there. It sits there. It doesn't break down. This high fructose corn syrup.
They're using it because it's a lot cheaper to manufacture foods.
Sure.
It's a lot more stable.
And it's sweet.
And it's very sweet.
So they say, but the American Heart Association recommends women consuming no more than 25 grams of added sugar, and men stay under 36 grams of added sugar per day. So, but if you look at the ingredients in so much food, it's not a matter of just putting a spoon of sugar in your coffee. If you are buying processed packaged foods, if you look at the ingredients, you're going to find there's an awful lot of sugar in so many foods that you wouldn't think would have sugar.
And even processed meats have sugars.
And remember that when you're reading the ingredients, they're listed in order of the most to the least.
Right.
So the very first ingredient is high fructose corn syrup.
Yeah, or even if it's the first through the 5th, I would say.
Yeah, and then it's glucose, and then it's sugar.
And if you've got more than 5 ingredients in a processed food, that's no good to start with because...
Well, you have a lot of preservatives and so on. Yeah, if you can't pronounce it, don't eat it.
For me, it would be stopping a lot of eating, that's for sure.
All right, number 2.
Number 2 is fried foods, and this makes a lot of sense because what are we frying things with these days? And those are the vegetable oils, which folks, they don't come from vegetables. They mostly come from grains or nuts.
Or petroleum.
Yeah, some of them. Because remember, cottonseed oil was used widely before the 1950s.
Lubrication
Yeah,
of machinery.
Yeah, that's where it was first used for sure.
So it says here that people who had a diet high in fried foods were linked to lower scores in learning and memory and what happens is basically the fried foods cause inflammation, which damages the blood vessels that supply the brain with blood. So then there was another study that looked at 715 people and measured levels of depression and mental resilience and documented their level of fried food consumption. And those who consumed more fried food were more likely to develop depression.
Yeah.
And that's kind of frightening.
And of course, we do fry food occasionally, but we strictly...
not even once a month.
Yeah, about once a month, it seems like.
Yeah.
And we use the good saturated fat. We use
lard.
Lard, yeah. Which
From our giant 5-gallon bucket.
Yeah, which we still have. We bought a few years ago. Yeah, we keep it in the freezer. Okay, the third one is high glycemic load carbohydrates. So these are, think about bread, pasta, think about potatoes.
Anything
like
made
that.
from refined sugar, flour. Rather.
Yeah, anything made from flour.
And even though it doesn't taste sweet, that we've talked about this a lot over the years, that the carbohydrates convert to sugar in your body, even though it doesn't taste sweet.
Well, anybody who's made a loaf of bread with no sugar in it understands why they put sugar in it, because it tastes so much better.
Well, actually, they put sugar in it to feed the yeast.
Oh, yeah, true.
So the bread will rise.
You're right.
Yeah, that's the key. If you're making bread at home, you're not putting a lot of sugar. Of course, if you're making brownies, that's a whole different thing.
Good point. Okay, so number 4 is alcohol. And,
the high glycemic load carbohydrates can also raise your risk for depression. So and what the author is talking about is saying, look, you don't have to eliminate all carbs from your diet, but you have to pick the quality of the carb that you're eating.
Well, if you're going with fruits and vegetables, and when I say fruits, I say grown in your area and also seasonal.
Yeah, local.
Yeah, then
local and seasonal.
Then you're going with the balance of nature, where most of the fruits that have high in sugar are in the fall, and they'll help you gain a little weight for the winter. So that makes sense to me. Okay. So number 4 is alcohol, and we know that excessive alcohol is going to do lots of different things to your body.
There's a lot of damage.
And the interesting thing in here, it says that people who don't drink at all and people who drink in excess
have the same problems.
Have the same problems. So a little bit of alcohol, and especially on a low-fat diet, a little bit of alcohol is actually a healthy thing.
Well, it said,
and a little is 1 or 2 drinks, not anything more than that.
Well, they said people who abstain from alcohol completely or consume more than 14 drinks per week had a higher risk of dementia compared to those who drank alcohol in moderation. And I guess they say heavy drinking is considered to be 14 drinks a week for men.
Yeah.
More than 4 drinks in a single day, at least once a month. Women who drink more than 7 drinks per week or 3 drinks per day.
And of course, there are certain populations that have an allergic reaction, let's say, to alcohol. So they become alcoholics.
Yeah.
It's an addictive thing.
An addiction problem.
Certainly, that's not good.
Yeah.
The 5th one is nitrates, and nitrates are things that they put into things to enhance the color,
to preserve
it, and maybe change the structure to make it more easier to engineer, let's say.
Well, they use it in standard bacon, sausage, bologna, salami, that kind of thing. Processed meats often have nitrates, and it's for preservation purposes primarily, right. Because you could put a roll of salami on the shelf and not worry about it being refrigerated or anything.
And our ancestors really used different grains like buckwheat flour, which is actually comes from a flour, not a grain. And they use that instead. And it suggests on here, You can't live without salami or sausages. Seek out those containing buckwheat flour, which is also used as a filler. It contains antioxidants that can counter some of these negative natural effects of these meats that are preserved.
It's very interesting. Yeah, and we get the bacon with no nitrates and so on, which means we have to be careful to refrigerate it or freeze it and so on. Okay, we got one more article for today.
Yeah, this is kind of a longer show than normal, but I really like this article, The Pursuit of Longer Life. And of course, kind of what the whole show is about is trying to be healthy as we grow older and have that active
age with quality of life.
Exactly.
And health.
Yeah. So what's the life expectancy of a human being? Well, it rose from 39 years in 1860 to 53 to 1920. And this really comes about through the use of better hygiene, discovering
better medical care.
Yeah, knowing that if you cut yourself and you don't take care of it, that you're probably going to die. Of course, the childbirth rate was a lot higher. Death rate was a lot higher in the old days because of complications. But if you go back even 20 or 30,000 years ago, the life expectancy of hunter and gatherers were always 70 and over. So it was really.
So what happened in between?
Well, we started agriculture and
living in close proximity.
Exactly, yeah, in more crowded areas, going into cities, and there is where the germs live, and that's where the rats followed us and things like that.
Yeah.
And in hunter-gatherer societies, there's less and less of those things, so it just makes sense. Are we saying go back to that? Well, some of it, yeah. I think we need to. Certainly, we moved out of Florida because it was getting crowded and more crowded, more dense population, and we wanted to.
And with the crowds came traffic, and then came
all the other
there's
things.
some levels of increasing risk to your well-being, and just from being in a car, you know. And,
so the reason we're living longer these days is basically vaccination, eradication of some of these things like smallpox, polio. Also, antibiotics played a role in that because if you get an infection, it used to be that you probably died unless you had a really good medicine man that knew the plants to help you. The other thing is
public sewage.
Exactly.
No, you don't. If you see a movie of the 1800s in England or whatever, and people throwing their garbage, their sewage out the window, you know, from the second floor.
They had those troughs that where the sewage
open,
went.
Open
so they
troughs.
just threw that stuff in there.
They chlorinating drinking water and pasteurization. You know, we've talked about those things as well, and they're a mixed blessing, but.
Yeah, public sewer systems. Well, you don't want to be too close to them. Same with the antibiotics. Do you want to use them all the time? Maybe you want to use it once in a while to save your life. That makes sense to me. There are other alternatives that people swear by.
Or have rediscovered from ancient healing process.
So the question really comes down to how long can people live? And the basic consensus now is that about 120 is about the outside.
Yeah, well, it's very interesting to me because I was teaching a course on aging in place, and in the process of teaching that course, I did a lot of research on centenarians, that's the category of people who are 100, from 100 to 110, and supercentenarians who are over 110. And I just checked just updated my research a little bit, and I found that in 2021, they're saying that there are 97,000 people just in the United States who are 100 to 110.
Wow.
And that in Japan, 6% of their entire population is over 100. And the oldest people in the world are in Japan at this point.
Yeah, I think the oldest person who lived, they calculated, was at 122.
Yeah, something around there. And a woman just recently died in Japan. She was 120.
Yeah, and my Aunt Cor, who recently passed away last month, was 100 and just before.
102?
Yeah, I think around that time.
Yeah. But
so I have a good
they
chance
also
of
say that
there.
By the year 2060, there will be, in the United States, more than 500,000, let's say 590,000 people who are 100 or older.
Well,
That's a lot of people.
And hopefully we're there.
Yeah, absolutely. 1 in every 1,000 centenarians is expected to become a super centenarian, meaning, so 1 in 1,000. If by 2060 there were 589,000 centenarians in the United States, and 1 in 1,000 is going to live past 110.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, of course, we've been following, what they envision. Of course, Dr. Sinclair, who we've talked about on this show several times, and we take some of the supplements that he raised in his conversation, and we find it very helpful to us. So what's the limit? Well, they're thinking 150, maybe even more than that.
And kids born today, I mean, there certainly are possibilities for living.
The whole thing is that you want quality of life. So no matter how long you live, and we don't know what happens afterwards. We have all these theories and beliefs of what happens. But what if things do go on? Maybe we don't know they go on. But, it makes sense to me that energy is never destroyed. One of the things we learn through science, it's when it just changes. And whatever lies ahead, I mean, we all are born and we all do pass away. And what happens afterward is unknown.
But while you're here,
have the great life. I mean, we're looking through this lens. Each one of us has this little screen that we look at life through and experience. And why not make it the best you can? And why not give yourself the best nutrition? And that's really why we ended up starting this show years ago. And
living to be 110 and having no idea where you are and not being able to get out of bed and generally not having a quality of life is a whole different thing than living to 110, being able to enjoy your family, being able to take care of yourself, feeling good.
And as you get older, you have more and more family.
Well, funny thing about that.
Yeah, so we can enjoy that more and more. So,
you figure 3 kids, then we have 7 grandchildren.
8 great-grandchildren, I think, or 7?
6.
Wait
a minute.
Hard to keep track of this whole thing.
We have, let's see.
And we have chances
3,
of becoming
4, 5.
great.
We have 6 grandchildren and 7 great-grandchildren.
Yeah. It's a beautiful thing.
Yeah.
Anyway, that's the show today. It's a little bit longer than normal, but it is what it is.
Pretty close.
Yeah, about an hour or so.
Yeah.
I want to thank you for sticking around. The Primal Edge is still available through the TFNN website. We haven't really decided. We're kind of deciding not to continue selling that on our own.
We'll figure something out so that you can get access to it.
Or we'll send you someplace where you can get something like it, perhaps. Yeah. We just want to have no commercials. We really don't want to push any kind of agenda. We just want to tell you what we're doing and trying to figure out how to live healthy and beyond that without any kind of burden of, hey, buy this and buy that. And I know a lot of people are doing it, and we have to live. And you have to earn a living. We're at the stage now when we've got a pretty stable thing going.
Well, we're not looking to make dollars, pennies out of it.
And pay more taxes.
Yeah.
So that's kind of the state of our thing.
So hit the like button.
Yeah.
Hit the subscribe button.
And
we'll see you next week. Have a great week and be well.
Take care.